Hi there, welcome. My name is Stephen Corrales. I'm a notary for the Metropolitan Tribunal here at the Archdiocese of Atlanta, and this is Dr. Felix Menendez, a judge here at the Metropolitan Tribunal. Today we'll be speaking about annulments and canon law for priests of the Archdiocese.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for agreeing to do this. I know this was a last-minute thing, so thank you very much for being our guinea pig for the priests. Okay, so how about we start with the very basic of marriage canon law. So what is marriage, right? Because I think marriage is one of these concepts, one of these words that we use, everyone uses, but we have different ideas about what they mean, and we don't realize we do, like democracy, right? Some people say, I don't know, the Democratic Republic of Germany was not democratic to American standards, right? Yeah. And we all use democracy, like whatever. Something similar happens with marriage, right? So, okay, out of the blue, what do you think marriage is? How would you define marriage?
I would say that marriage is a union of a man and a woman with God.
So,
atheists, a permanent one. A permanent one.
So atheists couldn't marry according to that definition?
I mean, yeah.
I know, it's tricky. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to start by subverting some expectations, which is something very fashionable lately, right? Marriage, okay, the first thing that can be, I think, very surprising is marriage is not about love. Marriage is about sex, right? Marriage is fundamentally about sexual intercourse. And only afterwards is about love, right? But let me get to it. I just want to grab your attention. Okay. Have you ever thought about where marriage starts? Like who creates marriage? Who invents marriage? Right. I mean, we speak about marriage and we think, yeah, marriage, but we don't know who was the inventor of marriage, who was the founder of marriage, who were the two first married people in the world, right? We don't know. I mean, for us Catholics, of course, and this is for Catholic priests. So, I mean, our faith teaches us, the Bible explains, Adam and Eve are the original couple, right? But that's really not a lot of answer for what we are looking for, because, but what does that mean?
Yeah,
right?
there's no ceremony in Genesis.
What are we talking about? Right. Yeah. So, speaking in terms of what science knows today, like research and discovery about our past as a species, what we know is that marriage exists since before we have memory. So before we started recording history, there was marriage, right? So you are a Hispanic. I am also a Hispanic, but we are from the two sides of the Atlantic, right? So when your Spanish ancestors arrived here in the Americas, there was marriage as well. So this portion of humanity that was separated for millennia from the rest of mankind had marriage, right? So marriage in this sense seems to be something natural to our mind, something that we humans naturally put in place in some situations, at least when there is civilization, right? So this institution, marriage, is the basis of civilization in that sense, right? So we don't know how civilization works without marriage. And I mean, we live right now in the deepest crisis of that institution, which is probably our oldest institution, right? Probably, if not the oldest, certainly among the oldest institutions, right? Like, I don't know, like purchase or barter, right? Could be institutions as old as marriage, but maybe even not, right? We don't know. What we know is that this is one of the oldest, something that we humans have been doing since before we started recording history, right? And this crisis that we are going through, because we are going through a very, very deep crisis of marriage, and our fellow priests know it very well because they deal with it every day in the parishes. This is probably, we don't know if we can have a society without marriage, right? Society seems to be crumbling down as marriage crumbles down. What we know for sure is that a society without marriage is going to be, if that happens, a completely different society, right? But, that's probably too big a reflection for what we're looking for here. I just want to start by trying to define what marriage is, right? And with that, I want to start with a caveat, okay? It is wrong to judge history from our current perspective, right? It's ridiculous to, I don't know, I'm a Spaniard, right? So I feel very bad when they say, oh, the Spaniards violated human rights. No one cared about that. It's like saying, oh, but they spread germs, right? Your Spanish ancestors killed your American native ancestors with viruses. Yeah, they didn't know viruses were even a thing, so they were not considering that. So let's not think about marriage, and this is good for everybody because we live in this time, so we have the mindset of our time, right? Yep. Let's not think about marriage from today's perspective about what marriage is, right? Okay. That's super important. Destination weddings in the Yucatan Peninsula of couples who have been cohabitating for 10 years are not a common experience for humanity. That's the French one. That's anybody from them. If you pull the majority of, if you pull the whole mankind that has lived through history, they would be amazed. What do you do, really? Like, you go to a place and you get 200 people. What are you, the Queen of England, right? By the way, apropos, that's a factor that has changed weddings a lot, right? Television, the broadcasting of royal weddings, right? Now all girls want to be princesses, so they do those big weddings that maybe 150 years ago would be crazy, so absolutely unheard of, right? Okay, so with that in mind, let me try to give an idea of what was the original contract of marriage, as was for the majority of time, right? And as is in the reflection of Catholic thinkers as a commonly accepted background, right? So theologians who spoke about marriage had these ideas in mind. You can, if you read the old books, right, about what marriage is, and by old I'm not meaning like from the first century, I'm talking 17th century and before that, everyone had these ideas in mind. That's all this to preface something that I'm going to say I know can be considered somewhat offensive, but here it is. Okay, the original contract of marriage was a man and a woman who agree to have sexual intercourse. Right? Getting pregnant is dangerous for a woman. It is not as dangerous today, but still is, and in most parts of the world, being a single mother is very dangerous. But until recently, it was very dangerous overall. That's why the Bible always instructs us to care for the widow and the orphan, because that was the worst situation. You're a woman, you're on your own, you're weak in a violent world, you can die, right? So as soon as we stop being hunter-gatherers who roam the places and live in small communities where everything is shared, right, we need to put a stop to that sexual intercourse, to that. And societies arrange themselves, and a wisdom starts to be transmitted from mother to daughter to granddaughter. Before you have sex, before you do that, have the man promise you in front of the community that he's going to take care of you, that he's going to protect you, so that if he doesn't fulfill his promise, everyone's going to shame him. Because otherwise, if you start having sex around, right? If you start, I think the expression is to fool around, right? You say that in English, right? Sleeping around, right? If you start doing that, you're going to die. And if you don't die, you're going to suffer a lot. Think of Aunt something who got pregnant and look, she died last winter, right? Of hunger and disease, right? Yeah. So because today we have a different society, we have an incredible economical development. So we see it all the time. Women can survive on their own, and some do very well on their own, right? I mean, it's difficult to raise children on your own. A man or a woman who have to face that still is difficult. I mean, I have two daughters. Thank God I'm married, and I know how difficult it is. So, and I think many times, right, about poor people who need to do this on their own. That cannot be easy. But the point is, that arrangement, that contract is the original contract of marriage. That's what we believe marriage is originally, right? The basis, that basic contract that appears. A man and a woman who agree to have sexual intercourse, and from that intercourse have children, which is what naturally comes from intercourse. And by the way, that's another element that's distorting our understanding of marriage, contraception, right? Nowadays, you have cheap, freely, readily available contraception. Most people use it, as we know, right? So even though the Catholic Church considers it to be immoral, even within the marriage, most people, even most Catholics, use it. So that is distorting our understanding of sexuality as opposed to everyone that came before us. Because until 1960, basically, it was in the 60s where this happened and the sexual revolution took place. Until then, you knew if you have sex, children are coming. So be very careful, right? Be very careful. I always say that until not that long ago, right, 2-3 generations tops, even in the most developed parts of the world, America, for instance, a mother could tell her daughter, do not have sex. Do not have sex with your boyfriend. If you do that, you're not going to be okay. Be careful, daughter. Don't do that. And the daughter had to say, yeah, mommy's right. I mean, shut up. Yeah. I mean, I know I have urges and I want to have love and sex and whatever, but mommy's right. I mean, this has changed today. I mean, if a mother tells that to her daughter, the daughter is going to say, well, mommy, actually, I know how to not get pregnant. And not only that, even if I get pregnant, look at this, and that. Women who raise their children together, right? So that all these things, even though they are against our morals, right, our Catholic ethics and our way of understanding marriage and life, we cannot avoid the fact that we are children of our time, and all these ideas have invaded our minds. So the way we, even you, the priests, right, understand marriage is irremediably affected by that mindset. Okay. So I'm gonna try to do a little bit of, I mean, I don't know if it's too pretentious, a little bit of history of marriage, right? A little bit of like the steps of the evolution of marriage, because certainly that original agreement is not what we see today, right? Not even in our Catholic understanding of marriage. We don't understand marriage like that anymore, right?
You touched on something earlier. I hope you touch on it here about how there are these hunter-gatherer communities with with shared everything, even like shared kids. So I'm curious to see about that, if you have any history on that.
Oh, yeah, that's a topic I love. I mean, I don't want to get into it a lot because it's not the purpose of these classes, but to me, it was a shock to read about these things, right? Like there are tribes in the Amazons, for instance. I've read about one case in which they don't even know that fatherhood is individual. Yeah. Right? So one woman of the tribe, she gets pregnant, and then she goes and has sex with the best hunter, the best storyteller, the oldest, the wisest, because they believe that fatherhood is like a progressive thing, right? Like all these
cumulative thing.
Yeah, all the seed of men give all that. They don't know that from one guy comes. So, I mean, all these things, right? I mean, science is always in progress. They are always discovering new things. But certainly, it appears that we humans have been around what they call the anatomically modern human has been around for 300,000 years now. I mean, it keeps growing. It was 200,000 a few years ago, and now it's way more. But for most of that time, we evolved as small communities where everything was shared, right? Everything was shared. And there are still hunter-gatherer tribes in the Amazons, in Australia. There are tribes who have not discovered fire. So they are still in that before the Stone Age, right? Yeah. So because of we were talking before about viruses and bacteria, to avoid transmitting to them diseases and killing them all, we're very respectful.
Contact, yeah.
But the things we know is that certainly they don't have marriage. Right? That idea is new. So they live in extreme poverty, right? But they don't want for anything, right? Because the food is around. They just hunt and gather, right? Okay. I don't know if I answered that. Yeah.
We'll go into the history more, and I'd love to hear.
But in my mind right now, because the first time I read about these things, I was shocked. Like, wow, this contradicts everything I've learned, right? Yeah. I studied moral theology and then canon law. So all these things are so central to me, that the understanding of marriage from a Catholic perspective. But then as I was, first it was a shock, but then I assimilated those ideas and I understood them at the light of the magisterium, of the teachings, of not the common understanding today, which is what probably brings us out of the picture. Yeah. But if you read all manuals of marriage, all these ideas are very clear for them, right? Mm-hmm. Marriage is a contract by which a man takes the right to have sex with a woman. That's what marriage is, right? Why? Why do they need to make that contract? Because having sex is dangerous. You get pregnant, you give birth to a new whole person, and you're responsible for a life. And we don't have all the money we have now. There were no government programs for single mothers a few decades ago.
I mean, a lot of people died in childbirth too, so...
That too, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like from what you're saying, essentially, a marriage is one of the primary signs of civilization. So it makes sense that these tribes, these uncontacted tribes, are not civilized. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and even it's speaking to our human nature. Humans are by nature meant to be social, and we naturally progress to live in civilization. That's what God made us for. So marriage is a sign of our human dignity. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like savages, if we can say the word. I mean, it's not despective. It means that you are not civilized. Comes from civis, which is, or kiwis, depending on the pronunciation, which is city. I mean, so it's like civilized people live in big groups, as opposed to the small roaming hunter-gatherers. As soon as we discovered agriculture, we have more food, we have more resources, so we have to distribute sex in a different way, right? We cannot be having sex when we please. We need to, as humans who have a will, and we are different from the other animals. And we are image of God in the fact that we have will, which is a reasonable appetite. So we can moderate our things. So it's a Good Friday, and I'm starving, and I want to eat a big cowboy steak, right? I am not a dog. The dog cannot refrain it. Either you refrain the dog, or the dog goes and eats, right? I am different. I am a human. So I can say, well, this is not good for me. Maybe I feel attracted to something, but you know what? I don't want to do it, right? I'm inclined to do it, but I don't want to do it. And that is why I have a human dignity that is different from others. So it's not that these pre-civilized humans don't have dignity. Of course, they do have dignity. And by the way, we Hispanics can pride ourselves in the School of Salamanca, who was the one that firstly developed this idea of the human dignity of the Indians, right? That those were the first ones that say, well, actually, they are humans like us. They are not animals. So we need to accord them some rights. We need to, right? So it's not that they don't have dignity. It's that they live in a circumstance that don't beg for marriage. Right? They live in a different circumstance, in a different environment, right? So when you have agriculture and you have more resources, you don't need to move around. You start having more people living together, and anonymity starts to happen, right? There is this theory about how many names you can remember, right? It's around 100, 150. Why? Because you evolved in in a context of a group of 100, 150. So you need to know the community because everyone knew everyone. I don't know if you have a family little town where you go back, right? It's typical in Spain. We live in cities, but everyone has his pueblo, right? Where you go back to the village. And in the village, everyone says hello, right? In the city, you go, do your thing. But in the village, hey, ¿qué tal? And you do some nonsense chit-chat. Yeah, the weather, yeah. But it's more human, right? That's what we evolved to do, right? Not this horrible anonymity where you don't know the other, right? And everyone is a stranger. So in the situation, in the context of a small group where everyone shares in everything, right? You are a woman, you get pregnant, you are after delivery, you're sick, you're hurting, whatever. The community cares for you. But when you live in a town of 20,000 people, I mean, what 20,000 people? Of 1,000 people, you are on your own. I mean, unless you have a strong family ties, right? Because family comes after the tribe, right? The family is a newer institution, right? After the tribe. So from the tribe, we evolved to something else through a new technology called agriculture, right? So with anonymity comes this need of establishing clear ties. Okay, so you have the right to have sex with me, but you have the responsibility of taking care of me and our offspring. Okay, deal? Okay, then we're married, right? In front of everybody. That's why marriage is naturally public, right? It's something that you do in front of everybody. Okay. Did I solve the question, or maybe I raised more questions than before?
That was good. I brought some good points.
Okay. So the first thing that evolved substantially in the understanding of marriage, right, is because if you look at this definition, so marriage is a stable union between a man and a woman, open to procreation, right? In that definition, man does not need to be monogamous, really, right? It's the woman who promises the man to be monogamous, right? So, and again, I understand this can feel offensive, but it really is not for the huge majority of mankind, right? From our small watchtower of the developed Western world, oh my goodness, we get all offended about things. But for the huge majority of the humans that have lived, and even today, for a big chunk, I don't know if it's the majority, but certainly a huge part of humans, polygamy is the norm. So polygamy is at least theoretically accepted in Islam, right? Yeah. If you are a Muslim, you can have, if you can afford to sustain them, up to 4 wives, right? And in big parts of Africa, polygamy is still because the contract was, okay, I have sex with you. The woman says, I have sex with you, and I deliver babies for you so that you can reproduce, which is one of our basic pulsions, our basic instincts, no? The instinct of reproduction. We want to leave our seed in the world. We love to see our children grow, right? That's why, by the way, speaking to the priests here, that's why the gift of self of priests in celibacy is so beautiful, right? You are, for the kingdom of heaven, renouncing to one of the most basic pulsions of your heart. And if priests don't find fatherhood through their ministry, they are frustrated. Right? Yeah. So it's not that you are someone who doesn't like women or someone who doesn't like children. That is not going to be a good priest, right? The good priest is going to be someone who loves children, and that intimacy that men typically live with their wives, they live that with God, the sponsality with Christ, right? Okay, going back to my outrageous point about polygamy, right? Originally, the wife promises fidelity to the man because the man doesn't want to spend his hardly earned resources paying for other men's children, right? Yeah. right? So but as long as he can support other women in that contract, it's okay. I mean, if he has other wives, right? As long as he supports everybody, right? That as long as we understand the dignity of women is unacceptable, right? We Christians refuse polygamy completely from the beginning, right? Because for us, marriage is not a purchase. So I purchase slaves, I purchase wives, I purchase concubines, I purchase houses. That's not how we think of marriage, right? So we understand marriage as the gift of self from a man to a woman and vice versa. So both give each other as equal partners, right? So if women have dignity and the same dignity as we men do, we cannot have more than one wife, right? But that is an evolution. We need to be mindful that polygamy is not so the norm or the part of the essential definition of marriage from the beginning. We understood that later on. Some cultures in the world have not understood that even today, right? And who are we to say, no, you're not married because you have the wrong concept of marriage, right? That would be also judging the past with today's standards, which is always a mistake, right? So we abhor polygamy, but we have polygamists who are saints, like King David, right? Oh, yeah. King David had wives and concubines. And not only that, when his son Absalom rebels against him, you remember what he did to... you know what he did to...
There's a civil war.
Yeah, but yeah. When he wins and David flees, you know what he does to show to the people that now he's the king?
He sleeps with his concubines.
There you go. Yeah. I have the quote here. They set up a tent on the palace roof where everyone could see it, and Absalom went in and had sex with his father's concubines, right? Like, okay, so now I am the king. Yeah. I think this is perfect example of not judge the past with today's standards, because how can this man be holy, right? And this is not like when he sends, how do you say in English, Urias, the Hittite?
Uriah
the Hittite, right? To kill. That was a sin, and everyone understood that was a sin. Having wives and concubines in his time was not understood to be a sin. It's a king. Of course he has wives. Of course, he's the king, right? Today it would be like, what are you telling me, right? I'm a king? Okay, well, he can be a king, but he can only have one queen, right? He cannot have, even though, I mean, let's be honest, kings are typically womanizers, but that's a different thing. Okay. So once we understand the dignity of woman, we cannot accept polygamy, right? I think, and since this is for priests who have all studied theology, you probably remember the fathers of the church speaking about the dispensation of the mysteries of salvation, right? So according to the fathers of the church, I'm thinking about Irenaeus of Lyon. How do you say?
Irenaeus.
Irenaeus, thank you. So God is a pedagogue. St. Paul says that, no? The law was our pedagogue, right? God is like a father bringing his son to adulthood through history, right? So God is a teacher, a good teacher that has given first baby food to us, then more complex, and finally with Christ the plenitude of revelation. And we are still understanding what has been given to us in Christ by the Father, right? So this is a great example of it, right? That the mystery of marriage has been revealed through the centuries. It's not something that came straight from the beginning as a packaged thing. Here, this is marriage. There you go. Theology of the body, John Paul II, first century. It was not like that, right? Okay. So the first big change we can see in the history of marriage is from polygamous marriage to an exclusive marriage, right? We believe in marriage as exclusive. That's what we call the essential property of unity, okay? Another thing is that when Christ comes in the plenitude of times, as the letter to the Galatians says, he taught us that divorce was not okay, right? And that is a scandal, right? Do you remember what the apostles say when Jesus teaches.
If that is the case, it is better to not marry.
Yeah, right? It's like, what are you saying, Lord? I mean, like, what? Are you out of your mind, sir? We cannot divorce? What if she's a... blah, blah, blah. What if I am in a situation? Yeah, no. And Jesus is, I think, surprisingly tough when teaching about these things, right? We are not used to these hardcore cement teachings by the Lord. And that is scandal that the disciples had in the first century, in the first decades of the Christian era, the church is still having. Today we have the same scandal, and I'm sure all the priests have this problem. Like when it's the reading of the gospel, how do I preach this knowing that I have people listening to me who are in these situations, right? These hard words, like if you divorce your wife, you expose her to prostitution, right? And Jesus says, the apostle, but I mean, Moses allowed for this. Moses allowed for us to repudiate our wives. And Moses is the mouth of God. It's the prophet with capital P, right? I mean, it's Moses, right? And say, yeah, Moses gave you that because of the hardness of your heart, the sclerocardia, sclerosis, and cardios. So it's because you have hearts of stone. Yeah. If you had hearts of flesh, you would understand that divorce is not okay, right? So that's certainly some big change, right, in the understanding of marriage. Because marriage is certainly something stable since it appears, right? So marriage is a special sexual contract, right? As there are other sexual contracts. So prostitution, right? No, yeah. Prostitution is an agreement, and they say it's the oldest profession, right? Certainly it's very old,
yeah.
Right? Prostitution means I agree to have sex with you for money, or maybe for, I don't know, if you can pay in species, or but also concubinage, right? Concubinage is rampant today, right? It's a sexual agreement, right? What they call cohabitation, because we don't want to offend, right? So one of my weaknesses, I love comedians, right? I know it's not very pious of me, but it helps me to understand the world, understand society. And there is an American comedian, I'm not going to say his name because he's very offensive, but he says, we Americans have the problem that we believe that changing words will solve problems, right? It's like, oh, don't call them crippled, call them disabled. Yeah, the problem is still the same. I mean, the feelings about words don't change issues. So concubinage is cohabitation, right? The right name for two people who are living together and having sex as if they were married, but without being married, is concubinage. That's what it is. I mean, we don't use it, and please, brothers, don't use that. But the truth is that is what it is, right? So, and that is a sexual agreement, which is we live together. But the day you want, you leave. You are out. You're good. The day I want, I leave. You're out. You're good. As opposed to marriage. Marriage is different because it's permanent, right? So marriage stays indefinitely. So you celebrate that thing, that beautiful ceremony, and then you create a union that stays in time. It's not like the concubines of King David or a prostitute that a man hires. The Bible is plenty. Yeah. There are plenty of prostitutes like Rahab, right? Who's, by the way, very cherished by the Bible, right? And Christ taught us to have respect for prostitutes because they go before us in the kingdom of heaven, right? I think it's because so a prostitute knows she has, so to say, the blood in her hands. She cannot hide her sins, as opposed to us who, I'm good. Like we are Pharisees in that sense. No, I don't kill anybody. I don't steal. So you're not convicted of sin. You're always pretending to be the best here, right? Which is so anti-evangelical, right? But I digress. Okay, so marriage is stable from the beginning, has a permanence from the beginning. So since this contract appears in history, marriage is something that stays. But Christ brings like another step, another turn of the screw. Marriage is not only stable, permanent, it is indissoluble. You cannot dissolve this union. But I created it. Doesn't matter. Once you do it, it's out of your hands. It's not up to you to dissolve this, right? So this is the other essential property, so the essential property of unity. This is the essential property of indissolubility. And then, by the way, feel free to interrupt, contradict, challenge, whatever, okay? Okay. Another thing that changes with Christ, right, is that marriage becomes a sacrament, right? And I love this because, I think I can say I am an expert in marriage, right? Mm-hmm. So I've accompanied so many married couples through my life. I've done pre-marital courses. Now, I am married myself, so I know it from the inside. And I have written my JCL thesis and my doctoral dissertation on marriage. And now I am a judge here at a marriage court. So marriage is my thing, right?
Well, I have a question for you then.
Okay,
Actually, going back to the last topic before we move on too much. Going back to, I guess it's, I'm really bad at quoting verses, but in Matthew, I guess when Jesus is talking about marriage, that essentially you cannot divorce your wife unless... for the case of, I think the Greek word is porneia.
Porneia.
Yeah, porneia. Mm-hmm. But most people translate that to either like unchastity, fornication, whatever. Could you speak to that? I guess how briefly you can.
I could, but I believe that the true answer is we don't know the answer, right? So this is one of the things that I believe whoever claims to know the answer is fooling you. You know, like, oh, I know the answer. No, you don't. Shut up, right? I remember years ago when I was studying theology in the class of synoptics, we had an excursus on that term, right? I mean, there is a school of biblical studies in Madrid where what they see is the Aramaic substract of the Bible. So considering that even though the canonical text is written in Greek, the writers were native Aramaic speakers, right?
Especially Matthew.
Right. I mean, John. John was a disciple of Jesus. They didn't speak in Greek. I mean, they would speak in Greek like, Puerto Ricans speak in English, right? I mean, normal people speak in Spanish.
It's a secondary language.
It's like having, my teachers taught me, having an apostle called Philip, which is a Greek word, lover of horses, right? Philo, hippos, right? It's like having a girl in Spain, where I come from, who's called Jennifer, right? Yeah. Why? Well, because it was the fashion, right? The Greek language was the language of culture, like, French was until a while ago, and English is now all over the world, right? So the Greek word is porneia. Pornography comes from the same root, right? But we don't really know what it meant, right? I think the most Catholic understanding of that clause is in cases of incest, right? Like St. Paul criticizes a case of incest that there was in one of the Christian communities.
His father, like stepfather, or his father's.
Yeah, but we really don't know. And one exegetical principle to interpret the Bible in a Catholic way, which appears in the Second Vatican Council, but beautifully it appears before in the Imitation of Christ by Thomas Kempis, is that the Bible needs to be read in the spirit in which it was written, right? Definitely. And this goes together with, you need to understand the whole of the Bible to get one point, as opposed to what Luther did, which is, I take one verse, right, the salvation through faith, and I trump all the rest of the Bible, to the point that he said some books of the Bible, I don't like them, like the letter of James, right? Santiago.
The Epistle of Straws.
Exactly. This very good, man. Yeah, it's like, so you don't like it, so you throw that down, are you out of your mind, right? So, bottom line, the porneia clause remains obscure, like other... other small parts I cannot think now about, when, like the coma ioneum. No, that's a different issue, right? But bottom line, we don't need to depend on the interpretation of 3 words of the Bible to have an understanding of marriage, because thank God we're Catholic, right? So we are not a religion of the book, right?
We have the
to us,
magisterium.
exactly. And I mean, the Word of God is Jesus Christ incarnate. The Bible is an inspired testimony by which the Word of God, but is not the ultimate authority, right? I love from Rome Sweet Home with Scott Hahn, and was he your teacher? No? Okay. So he says, making the parallel with America, right? The founding fathers didn't just say, here the Constitution, there you go, make a country. No, I mean, they gave institutions. They took institutions from the old world and made them new and different. That's the point, right? We are, thank God, not Protestants who only have a Bible, right? We don't have the typical Protestant suspicion of human nature, right? Because that's what Luther comes from, right? Luther believes that all nature is doomed, right? He was an Augustine, so he had read a lot of the most anti-Pelagianist texts of St. Augustine, and he was so imbued of that he was suspicious of everything flesh, everything human, everything natural, right? To him, he explains justification with a pile of cow
manure.
Manure that is covered by the snow, right? But the manure is inside, so there's no real transformation. That's not what we believe, right? So God transforms our nature and makes our nature holy, and divinity can be transmitted to humanity through the sinful hands of priests. We receive all blessings, right? It's not Father this or Father that. Who's the sinner that's giving me the blessing? It's he acting in persona Christi Capiti. So in the person of Christ the head, Christ operates. God acts through us. Not like the devil, who, when he possesses us, he deprives us of our freedom. The Holy Spirit is the opposite. The more he operates, the more free we are. So it's a symbiosis, if you want. It's not a parasitical relationship like what happens in a possession by the devil, right? It's the opposite. So we are, how would you say, potenciados, no? We are.
We become fulfilled. Yeah,
Exactly. Okay, so bottom line, we don't know. Okay, so I was talking about. So far we've said marriage is that original agreement. Okay, then we evolve from a permanent marriage to an indissoluble marriage, right? First from a polygamous marriage to an exclusive marriage, right? Which is, we call that the essential property of unity. Then we evolve from a permanent, stable marriage to an indissoluble marriage that cannot be dissolved by any authority on earth. What God has united, let no man
separate.
Thank you. And now, with Christ, we also have another big change in our understanding of marriage, which is the sacramentality, right? Marriage is a sacrament, right? And so it is true that the 7 sacraments were not finally defined until much later on. The Council of Trent is the one that finally says, okay, we have 7 of these. Okay, that's what we call the septenary. And in this septenary of 7 sacraments that we have, marriage is the only one that exists before the institution of the sacraments by Jesus. So the other sacraments, okay, did not exist before. So the thing did not exist before. Yeah. For instance, you had baptisms. So you had the baptism of John, right? And if you go to the Holy Land, it's beautiful how it's full of baptismal pools with the steps to go down. You baptize yourself, you get renewed in the waters of that baptism, and you come out a different person. Right. But that was not our baptism, which is your immersion in the death of Christ and the resurrection with Christ, so that in the day of your death, you remember that you were incorporated to his death, so that you can partake in his resurrection, right? That, and also there was Seder Pesach. No, the Eucharist was the Holy Thursday first, the last dinner, the first Eucharist was a Seder Pesach. It was the order of the Easter that the Jews were celebrating for centuries. And Melchizedek offered bread and wine, and there was thanksgiving. But that is not our Eucharist, right? Like when we celebrate the Mass, we don't do the whole Seder Pesach. We just took a couple of things from that because the apostles understood, and they are the transmitters of the liturgy that Christ taught us. The apostles understood, well, what Christ taught us to do in his memory is not the whole Seder. It's the consecration of the bread, the unleavened bread, and the consecration of the chalice. And by the way, there are several chalices in the Seder Pesach, but only one. Yeah. We have a great team of notaries at the Metropolitan Tribunal. I'm so proud, right? But marriage is different. The marriage that was elevated to the dignity of a sacrament by the Lord is not another thing. It's that same thing. And the church has been very adamant about this, by the way. I think, and since we're talking to priests, I think this is probably one of the biggest misunderstandings when it comes to Catholic clergy, right? This vague, floating idea, widespread idea, that you have a marriage that is kind of like, civil marriage, secular marriage, and then you have sacramental marriage, which is a relationship between three people, right? That is wrong. That is not true. I mean, there are parts of it that are true, and I don't want to make you very sad or offend you, but that's not what the Catholic Church teaches, okay? The separation between the contract and the sacrament appears with the modern state, right? The modern state, this beast, that wants to take everything from us, right? So half of your money, give it to the state, right? The taxation, the state that messes with your life, that tells you what you need to teach to your children. That modern state, of course, marriage. That's delicious. I want marriage for myself, right? So the state starts by introducing civil divorce, and the church was radically opposed to that from the beginning. Like, who are you, secular state, to grant divorces of my sacraments? I mean, they came freely to be married in the eyes of the church. Yeah. How dare you grant a divorce to something that happened in the church, right? And there is no doubt about this. I mean, I'm not saying there was a fringe theory for crazy priests in Italy. No. This was the whole Catholic Church, adamant until yesterday about these things, right? Opposing civil marriage was considered basically like a Catholic duty of every good Catholic, right? The state intervenes and says, okay, well then you care of the sacrament, and I take care of the contract, right? And the church says, no way, absolutely no. The contract is the sacrament, and the sacrament is the contract. That's in the code of canon law today. So it says basically that it is. I don't know if I have the quote here of Canon 1055, right? Because that's where it appears, and it says that there cannot be a valid marriage among the baptized that is not by the same thing, eo ipso, a sacrament. So if it is a marriage and both spouses are baptized, that is the sacrament of marriage, right? So I think this is an important point to make for our dear priests, right? Marriage is not divided into two categories, right? Well, to some extent it is. So let me be more precise. There are not two different marriages, right? The sacramental marriage and then the marriage for the non-initiated, right? If it is a marriage, so if they are married, right? If they exchange the consents, okay, saying, I agree to have a stable sexual relationship with you, open to procreation, to raise our family together, and both parties are baptized, that is the sacrament of marriage. And if it's not the sacrament of marriage, they are not married, because among the baptized, it is impossible to have a true marriage that is not a sacrament. Okay, and really, I think this is a floating idea, right? Like you kind of pointed out when you started giving that definition of marriage, right? I remember when I started working here, I don't know who did this, thank God, because you say the sin, not the sinner, right? But I remember, I think it was an advocate or a deacon, I don't know, who said, took the liberty of deposing the parties on his own, which is something you don't do. And he had made up questions on his, and one of the questions, and talking about matrimonial nullity for an ecclesiastical tribunal, right? One of the questions is, was your marriage a relationship among three people? Like, meaning the husband, the wife, and God, right? Not that they were in a polyamorous situation, right? That's wrong. I mean, that is beautiful, right, for a retreat, for matrimonial spirituality, which is also so important. But that's not what we believe that marriage is essentially, right? Marriage is a stable union between a man and a woman who agree to have sexual intercourse and raise their children together. That what is the core, the essence of marriage, right? Okay, so Christ makes a new sacrament, right? Elevates the existing contract that he lived through. I mean, Christ starts his preaching in a wedding, right? Weddings were big parties, big celebrations that were usual in his time. So he is born, he's incarnate in a world with marriage. And he makes that thing, not a different thing, right? That thing, he raises, he elevates that to the dignity of a sacrament. And that's what we believe that the sacrament of marriage is, right? Okay. Now, after Christ, we kept growing in our understanding of the mystery of marriage. And another big point was the consummation of marriage. Right? So we can say that the Catholic tradition of marriage drinks from two big traditions, the Roman and the German tradition. And this, of course, can be nuanced. I'm talking in very general terms, okay? So take everything I say cum mica salis, with a big grain of salt. Okay. According to the Roman tradition, a contract is celebrated with the consents. According to the German tradition, a contract is celebrated with the reception of the object of the contract. So, in the purchase of a cow, right? The Roman tradition would say, well, the handshake, right, of the two stock businessmen, that agreement, that is the contract. Right? That is when the contract takes place, right? The German tradition would say, when you get the cow is when the contract takes place, right? So if you transpose this to marriage, the Romans say, consensus non concubitus facit nuptias. So the consent, not the cohabitation, makes the wedding, right? And the Germans would say, no, the wedding really is the bedding, right? It's when they've... Exactly. And this was kind of floating around for a long time until, by the way, a Spaniard Pope, Alexander VI, solved the question, saying the formal moment of the celebration of the contract, when the marriage is a true marriage, is the exchange of consents. Now, when it is consummated, it acquires a special force, and then is when it cannot be dissolved. This means, on the other side, on the reverse, that marriages that are not sacramental or non-consummated can be, and are de facto, dissolved by the Pope, right? You have the Pauline privilege, Petrine privilege, and the dissolution of the non-consummated marriage, and we'll talk about that in another lesson. But, okay, so another step in this Catholic understanding of marriage is the consummation of marriage. And then, this is not an understanding, it's a discipline, right, of the Church, but it's very, very relevant for Catholic priests, right? It's the canonical form, right? So, have you read Don Quixote?
I have not read Don Quixote. No.
Okay, so I was about to turn 30 when I said I haven't read Don Quixote, so I did it. And actually, I mean, of course, you need to know Spanish to read it in original, and the first part is difficult because it's like reading Shakespeare, right? It's difficult, but Don Quixote, it's fascinating. I mean, it's a fun book. I mean, once you go over the language barrier, it's beautiful. And one thing that happens several times through the book is that there were men who were in love with women and were pushing and want to have sex with you, right? And they, very ladies, señoritas, no, I'm a lady, I don't you even think about that. But then they end up falling, having sex, and the man regrets, buyer's remorse, and flees and leave them, as we would say in Spanish, compuestas y sin novio, no? So leave them alone. So Don Quixote, through the book, reunites these couples because in their mindset, which is before the Council of Trent, I mean, this was written afterwards, but the mindset was still there. In their mindset, if you have sex, you are married. So that is the copulation place with with matrimonial intent. So it was considered that having, and going back probably to that German tradition of marriage, right? And again, take this with a grain of salt, okay? I know this can be nuanced a lot, but I mean, we're just giving an introduction here. This sexual intercourse was understood as you are getting the object of the contract. Therefore, you are married now. Right. That's what it just happened. You got married. And the Don Quixote restores them to their lawful wives, right? Because it was understood that, well, I mean, you did that. Well, that is marriage. That's what marriage is for. And I think also that is one example of something that has completely escaped our mindset, right? That understanding that what is marriage? Marriage is the right to have sex. People don't think like that anymore. Not even inside the Catholic Church. Most Catholics, I would dare to say, don't think like that anymore, right? There is a movie, I'm a movie buff, right? This movie, I use it in my videos on marriage that, by the way, we're going to use as a resource for this course. I'll put the link in the description, but it's in my channel. It's a movie with Robin Williams where he's a priest. I think it's Until the Priest Do Us Part or something like that, right? He's a kind of a funny priest. And, I mean, to me it was shocking, right? Because I when I first watched the movie, right, he's supposed to be a priest, right? And he starts the movie with a description of how a typical relationship goes, right? The asking her for a date, the first kiss, then moving together, and then the wedding, right?
Oh,
right?
No.
right?
Yeah.
For us Catholics, that's not how it works. But for most of the world, that's how it is today. So having sex is not understood anymore as the object of marriage.
Right.
Many people, if not most people today in our context, get married when they are going to have children. Because of contraception, they can control fertility, right? So that is not what we think. The canonical form, okay, was instituted by the Council of Trent to avoid, I guess among other problems, to avoid secret marriages. They were illicit, so it was forbidden to do a secret marriage, but if you did them, it was valid. Yeah. It's like today, if you marry so a Catholic who marries another Christian, who's a non-Catholic Christian, those weddings are valid, illicit. They are forbidden without a dispensation. You don't do it, don't do it, fellas. But if you do it, those weddings are valid, as opposed to the wedding between a Catholic and a non-baptized person without dispensation. That is not a valid wedding, right? So that distinction, by the way, between illicit and invalid is essential in canon law. It's very important. So some things are forbidden, but if you do them, that is it gets its effects, right? And some things are forbidden to the point that if you don't get a dispensation, you don't even get the effect, right? Illicit and invalid. Okay, so secret weddings were forbidden, but they were valid. So the Council of Trent says, from now on, for Catholics, to get married, you need to do it, you need to exchange the consents before your pastor or your bishop or another clergyman delegated by them. Right. Otherwise, you're not getting married. And imagine, right, like a rich man dies, and then 20 women come forward saying, no, he married me first. I was the first wife, right? So the Council of Trent cuts that. But it didn't cut it definitely because the Council of Trent mandated this new disposition to be promulgated diocese by diocese. So, of course, in very Catholic places, canonical form was instituted immediately. Yeah. Like where I come from, I first was assigned to a parish in the north of Spain, and thanks to the Jacob's Way, the new documents, the dispositions of the Council of Trent came very quickly. So we had in that parish, we had the books, the records dating back to the 1700s. Wow. It was beautiful. I mean, you could read history there, right? And we had it in a, I mean, it was closed with doors, but it was a library like this, man, like accessible to us, beautiful, right? Okay, so the canonical form, by the way, is not to be mistaken with the place where you marry. That's super important, okay? The canonical form is not to marry in a physical church, okay? You can do canonical form in any place, right? Let's say in a hospital bed. That can be a canonical form marriage, right? Someone who's dying and wants to marry before death, that certainly is a canonical wedding, right? If we follow canonical form, which is the exchange of consents is performed before the pastor or the bishop or a delegated clergyman and two witnesses, two people, whoever they are, but two people. Without two witnesses, you don't have canonical form, and you are not married if you're Catholic. Right. And this law was promulgated first diocese by diocese, right? But there were places where it was not promulgated until the first code in 1917 makes that universal law for the whole Latin rite of the Catholic Church. But before that, there were places here in America where in 1916, you could marry in secret. And that was a valid wedding, like similar to what is known here in the States as the common law marriage, which, by the way, was valid in the secular laws of Georgia until the 90s. Right? Oh, wow. We here had a case of they got civilly married. They were not Christian at the time, and they got civilly married in a restaurant. They had been living together, and that was accepted by the secular law. Yeah. Therefore, we consider it valid as well. Okay, so I've explained more or less how marriage has evolved, okay, through history. Now, I would like to make more like the anatomy of marriage, right? Okay, so what parts does marriage have? Okay, the first distinction, fundamental, is between marriage in fieri, matrimonium in fieri, and matrimonium in facto esse. So marriage in fieri is the marriage, blunt translation, yours truly, it would be marriage in becoming, right? Okay. The marriage that is getting to be marriage, as opposed to the marriage in facto esse, in the fact of being, right? Okay. Marriage in fieri is the exchange of consents, the wedding, right? The wedding, by the way, is not the banquet, is not the ceremony, is not the dress, all those are superficial things, or accidental if you want. Marriage is the exchange of consents by words of present. That is a wedding. Okay. That is what wedding really means, right? The union created by the wills of a man and a woman that give each other as husband and wife, and they express that. Of course, people who cannot speak can marry too, but they need to express that will to marry, right? Then from that exchange of consents, a new thing appears, which is that union between a man and a woman that we call marriage, right? That is something new. right? That is, and that is different. By the way, the seventh sacrament is not the union. The seventh sacrament is the wedding. Okay, the act by which ex opere operato, the grace of God, enters the world through actions and words protagonized by humans, is the wedding, not the union. I mean, sensu lato, you can say, for instance, the priests are a sacrament, a living sacrament, but that's not the sixth sacrament. The sixth sacrament is the ordination, when the bishop is imposing his hands on the head of the priest and saying the words of the consecration. That's the sixth sacrament of the church. Okay, because sacrament is a polysemic word. Sacrament is the church. The church is the originary sacrament, right? And it's taught like that in the text of the Second Vatican Council, when it says that the church is the sacrament of salvation for mankind, right? And I don't know, we can say that the poor are a sacrament of Christ, right? Because Christ comes to us in the poor, right? But speaking formally, in a precise form of speaking, sacrament is the action that is efficacious in what it signifies, right? That action that ex opere operato grants the grace of God, right? Okay, so you have the matrimonium in fieri and the matrimonium in facto esse. That's a super important distinction. The object of the consent, what you agree to the consent, is the matrimonium in facto esse. So the union, right? You agree to create that stable union. Okay. The consent, by the way, cannot be supplied, meaning by that no one can give consent instead of the spouses, right? Not the Pope, not the President of the USA, not your parents, by the way. For we Christians have traditionally been very opposed always to the intervention of parents in the choosing of the vocation of their children, right? That is a place for God and God alone to speak with you in your conscience. What are you going to do with the rest of your lives, right? There was a moment, I don't remember exactly when it was, when the secular laws wanted to request the consent of the parents for marriage, and the church opposed that. No. I mean, of course, parents must be good, must teach their children, etc. But ultimately, the choosing of the state of your life depends only on you two, you and God, right? And if you marry, of course, your spouse, right? Okay. I want to point out another typical misconception, right? The marriage covenant versus the marriage contract, right? Many people say, oh, they only had a contract, they didn't have a covenant. I think, well, of course, this is just theory. I mean, you can be Catholic and still have different ideas to this part, okay? This is more me and my understanding of marriage, and I want to be very clear about what is the teaching of the church and some particular ideas that I have. I believe that covenant is a contract, right? It has a more sacred flavor to it, but the covenants are contracts. Right. So the contract that God makes with his people, the alliance, covenant, they are all the same thing ultimately, right? They all belong to the big category of contracts, right? Now the new contract, the new and eternal alliance, we could translate that as the new and eternal contract. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't sound so nice, but it certainly is possible because it's what it means. So a contract is an alliance, is a covenant when it's sacred, right? And marriage is a covenant, always. By the way, all marriages, also non-sacramental, also called natural marriages, are sacred, right? All marriages are sacred. I mean, and from the beginning, I mean, the secular mindset is from yesterday. I mean, something so deep as the first time a young man enters the sacred body of a woman, right? Something like that must have been deeply religious for all humans until yesterday. So a secular marriage is an invention of tops a few generations ago, right? I mean, imagine, and we can see that through the different celebrations of marriage throughout the world. I have these friends from India. They were showing us the pictures of the wedding. It's so deep, the understanding of marriage in a culture that is completely different to ours, right? Yeah. Marriage is always sacred. Marriage is always, but there are some marriages that are also sacramental marriages, right? As opposed to what we call natural marriages. But those natural marriages are also sacred, right? They are covenants too, okay? And so I think I'm making the point sufficiently clear because we're addressing our priests. Do not make the mistake of thinking that we have a new thing called sacramental marriage, which is essentially different from the marriage that was celebrated before. Right. Okay, it's not essentially different. It's the same agreement between a man and a woman, with the difference that they are baptized. Yeah. They have been incorporated to the Paschal mystery, to the mystery of Christ died and resurrected. They have been buried with Christ in his death, and they have been risen with him to reign with him. Therefore, their sexual union is now a sacrament, right? That's the right theology, right? By the way, I love that from John Paul II, saying that the union of the spouses is not only not sinful, it is a source of graces, right? When done right, sex is the most wonderful thing, right? God didn't give that to us as a, look, you can get that, right? It's not a punishment. On the contrary, right? There is this blessing there is this text in the blessing, in the nuptial blessing, one formulary, I don't know exactly which, that says that marriage is the only blessing that was never abolished, right? So throughout the changes in history, Christ kept that blessing, the sweet blessing of the love of man and woman that was never abolished throughout the different alliances, right? It kept like it. And by the way, marriage is the favorite metaphor for God to speak to us about his relationship with us, right? So sin is prostitution, right? When Christ speaks with the Samaritan woman, he says, you had 5 Baal. I learned that from the School of Madrid, the Aramaic substract, right? You had 6 husbands. Husband in Aramaic is Baal, right? So he's mentioning the pagan gods that were worshipped there before they turned to the true husband, which is the Lord. And Christ is the groom. And I get emotional with this. And the cross is the bed where the Lord has made humanity his bride, right? That's where el lecho de amor donde nos ha desposado el Señor. I couldn't say that in English, no? So, please don't make the mistake, for the last time, and I shut up about it, of thinking that the sacrament of marriage is essentially different to the marriage that from Adam and Eve, as we say traditionally in the Catholic tradition, right? So, when you get married, the formal object of that is the jus in corpus. This is an old typical expression of canonists and theologians that now we've lost because we're like that, right? But it's formally what you get when you get married is the jus in corpus, the right to the body, the right to have sex. Right. You know? You are now mine and I'm yours, and vice versa, right? That's what the marriage is. I know that this is very difficult to understand after the sexual revolution of the 60s, but it's true. It's completely true. That is what you are agreeing when you're getting married, right? However, as we were saying at the beginning, the right to sex is also exchanged in other types of partnerships, right? Like the concubinage or the prostitution. But this, as you very, very adequately pointed out, this union is permanent, right? This union stays through time. Why? Because it's not ordered to sexual pleasure just because. This is ordered to procreation. And children deserve a father and a mother. They deserve a family, right, where they can be born and raised.
Yeah, I have a side question, just somewhat related.
Sure.
What is the I guess, the church's definition, or like even just, I feel like this can be very subjective. What is the definition exactly of one flesh? A man and a woman become one flesh. I'm pretty sure. I mean, like I said, I'm bad at quoting the Bible, but like I think there's a point when Paul even says that like to not have sex with prostitutes because you become one flesh with her. So what exactly does one flesh mean?
So I don't think you can give a definition of one flesh, because one flesh is a metaphor to speak about a different thing, right? Is I don't know. You can speak about the teeth as pearls, but if you define pearl, you define as a round secretion of the oyster, right? So I don't know if you can give a definition in the proper sense, like with the proximum genus differentia specifica, which is a definition. I don't think you can do that. But we can explain what it means. So there was a word that was used traditionally to speak about sex that is commixtio, the mixing of the bodies. Because sex is not just plumbering, right? Sex is not just physical. Sex is spiritual. Sex is emotional. And I mean, for instance, we were talking about prostitution. Men end up in love with prostitutes, right? They say, I don't know much about prostitutes, but no, I really don't. It's not a thing that, but I know a little bit. I mean, I've read here and there. I've listened to a few prostitutes, and I think, I mean, if this is wrong, I'm sorry for saying something wrong, but I've heard that it is typical for prostitutes to hope for a good man, a good client that would fall in love with them and take them out of that terrible situation, right? So when we have sex, in that sense, we become one flesh, right? So we are commixed, according to the old expression. We're united. The way by which Jesus explains that divorce is not okay is with this expression, right? They are just one flesh. So because they are one flesh, and by the way, flesh here means body, right? One body, right? La carne, the caro. That one flesh cannot be separated because it's one body now, right? But again, I mean, I don't think we can define it because it's not a formal term. It's more like a beautiful, wonderful way to explain what is the union of man and woman, right?
So it's more of an expression than like a concrete thing, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that.
Okay.
But I may be wrong. Yes. So in any way, I didn't mention it, but there is a beautiful. Let me see if I can find it here. There's a beautiful quotation. Yeah, here it is, from Saint Augustine. Right. It's typically quoted whenever we want to say how difficult this is. Right. By the way, Scicluna, which is an official, I think he's the second official at the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, Archbishop of Malta. He has this quotation at the beginning of his doctoral dissertation, right, which was directed by my mentor's mentor, the great Cardinal Urbano Navarrete. No? He starts, after dealing with these points and discussing them in this way to the best of my ability, I am not unaware that the whole question of marriage is still very unclear and complex. I would not be so bold as to claim that I have yet unraveled it fully, either in this work or any other, or even that I could do so now if pressed. Right? Because it certainly is. I mean, it's a huge mystery. In marriage, everything converges. I mean, it's philosophy, it's theology, it's biology, it's I mean, all the areas of knowledge converge in this mystery because it's so old and it has been shaped by so it comes from our most inner desires. It has been shaped through all the important events in history. For us Christians, it's a sacrament. So it's a place where the heavens open and we see God, right? Like when a priest celebrates the Eucharist, right? The world stops, come to a rest because The very sacrifice of Christ in the cross is there, right? Well, that thing is the union of a man and a woman, according to St. Paul, right? Yeah. The closest to heaven you can be is when Christ gives himself fully and wholly to his church. Mm-hmm. That is what happens in the altar of the Eucharist, and that is what happens in the altar of the conjugal bed, mm-hmm. right, where the spouses make a perfect gift of self, right? So the object of marriage is that partnership that is not only permanent, not only stable, but is also indissoluble. It cannot be broken anymore. The object of the contract is the right to sex, the jus in corpus. Mm-hmm. And this partnership is permanent because the spouses are going to have children, and the right place for children to come to this world is with a man and a woman. By the way, I know this is hard to accept for a lot of people. I mean, nowadays, children born out of wedlock are, I don't know if a majority right now in this country, but if not a majority,
it's growing, definitely growing.
A huge. By the way, speaking of this, you know something I found very interesting when I came here is how people were worried about their children. So when they get the declaration of nullity, are my children gonna be bastards? Right? I was like, why is that so important? I think maybe it's because bastard is an insult in English. But I mean, in Spanish you wouldn't say bastardo. That sounds like you're from the 1600s. So, they don't, by the way. Yes. So if you get a declaration of nullity, the children born out of that union are not illegitimate because they were born of a putative marriage, mm-hmm. right? So a marriage that was in good faith considered to be valid. So the children are not illegitimate. So the children born out of wedlock don't have less dignity. Okay, this is important because nowadays we have so many. But certainly, I think it's something anyone who's in this situation, right, can say honestly and probably with pain in their hearts, right? It would be better for me to have been born with a mom and a dad that love each other, right? By the way, they say that it is not so much. So it's not so important for children to have a father and a mother that loves them, but to have a father and a mother that love each other, right? Yeah. And that can be shown with little kids. When they come to bed early in the morning and on a Sunday, they want to be in the middle between the parents, right? Mm-hmm. So we all want to come from a perfect union. We all want to come from a perfect love, a wonderful love that comes, that ultimately comes from the love of God, right? That's we are not yet divine creatures, but we are called to be divine creatures, right? So God became man so that man becomes God, right? Okay. So if this is the nature of marriage, we can understand the two goals or ends of marriage, which are the good of the spouses and the good of the children, right? There was some discussion at some point, right, between the hierarchy of these goods, right? Traditionally, it was understood that the good of the children came before the good of the spouses, right? So no one doubted that. But as we kept growing and growing in what is called by the church the personalistic understanding of marriage, there were some, hesitations on this. Like, so the good of the spouses is less important than the good of the children. And I mean, basically, again, this is one of the cumica salis things, okay? So I'm going to speak in rough terms. The dispute was solved in the sense that they are two sides of the same coin, right? So, and I don't think it's that difficult to understand. So what is best for a child that to have parents who love each other, right? Who are happy, who are content, who can give them a good life. And at the same time, what is best for a spouse than to see their children growing? And so the good of the spouses is like, if it's not exactly the same as the good of the offspring, it's so close. They go united. They grow together, or together they perish, right? And then we have like other like important parts of marriage. So to say, St. Augustine is very important for the church in his reflection on marriage. St. Augustine speaks of marriage with three goods, right? The tria bona in Latin, the good of the offspring, the good of the faith or the good of fidelity, and the good of the sacrament or the good of the indissolubility, as we call it, right? And by the way, those three, as we will see later in the course, are the three traditional exclusions that make marriage invalid, right? Exclusion of indissolubility, exclusion of children, and exclusion of fidelity. And then there are the two essential properties. I spoke about them before. And they have a funny name, right? So essential properties. It's like they are essential, they are not. What are, right? Unity and indissolubility. So unity goes against polygamy, and indissolubility goes against divorce, right? And we have that beautiful name, essential properties, and because of their particular nature, right? So they are not essential to marriage in the sense that even if you don't know about them, you get married. So most people in the world don't know that marriage is exclusive and indissoluble, right? Most people today, yes, this is something that only a few Catholics, not even all Catholics, know this, right? But despite that, you get married. So it's not essential because you can want something only if you know the essence of something, right? Yeah. But they are essential in the sense that if you reject them, you don't get married, and all marriages have those properties. Even if those who got married didn't know about them, if you have a real marriage, it is unique, it is exclusive, and it is indissoluble. You cannot divorce it. Right. Okay, that's hence the name, the particular name, right? And then the sacrament of marriage is that same marriage that has been elevated, raised by Christ to the dignity of a sacrament. And finally, when the spouses have sex for the first time after the marriage became sacramental, I'm going to get a little poetic here. When they have consummated the promise of their holy covenant, when they perform the gift of self in the flesh, when there is no rape, no abuse, no unfair coercion, no contraceptive will, but only love, then they seal the deal and tie a knot that only death can dissolve. Right? That is what we call the sacramental and consummated marriage that is absolutely indissoluble by any authority on earth. Right? The Catholic Church believes that she has not received from Jesus the authority to dissolve these marriages. Right? That's very clear in the magisterium. Okay, so far this was an introduction to the basis that is behind the legislation of the Church on marriage. Right? These are concepts that we cannot sadly take for granted because I hope I subverted some expectations. I hope I challenged some of the preconceived ideas that we have about marriage.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for doing this. Thank you, Stephen. And thank you for your work as a notary here. I'm sure the priests of the diocese are also thankful.
Glad to be here.
Thank you, my friend.